Are you a holy fool? Or do you default to truth and believe everybody? That's the subject of part 2 of Malcolm Gladwell's Talking to Strangers. We are Painted Porch Strategies. This is our book club, as you probably already know. Thank you for joining us. My name is Rob Hunter. This right here is Amy Yakowski. That right over there is Sierra Ram Cantrell. So we are a team together, united in stoicism, reading this book about how people can fool us. Strangers can fool us. So I brought up the holy fool. Mm-hmm. The holy fool, the story is an ancient Russian tradition. There was a man who looked at a statue of Mary and said, that's the devil's work. And they were like, get out of here. That's Mary. It's not the devil's work. And someone threw a rock, hit that statue of Mary. And underneath was, in fact, the devil. So it turned out that the holy fool was right. So the holy fool in our context, in our life, could be considered someone like a whistleblower, which is what Gladwell goes into. Often odd, often eccentric, often outcast is how he describes the holy fool. Because they're the ones that have access to the truth, but also are not real sure about trusting people. So where do you guys fall on that scale? I guess it's not really a scale, it's one or the other. Like, which side are you on?
Well, I'm not totally sure where I fall in as far as my part, but I love how he talks about how the holy fool is both really important, but also how you can't have too many. Mm-hmm. A lot of what he talked about in this section that we read this week was having to do with that balance. And he brings up about like how there's almost way too much imbalance of us being way too trusting. So he talks about this role of the holy fool. Another version he mentioned is like the emperor's new clothes, where basically everybody convinces the emperor these are these fantastic clothes, and the only people who are really trustworthy will see your beautiful new clothes. And they make him nothing. They probably swindle him out of all this money. And then a little boy in the crowd says he's naked, right? Like the little boy is the holy fool, is the truth teller. But Malcolm Gladwell warns us that if we were all holy fools, then we would never trust each other enough to do anything. He even says, if we were all holy fools in Wall Street, there would be no Wall Street.
Because nobody would trust that companies would grow. So if you invest in them, you're going to lose all your money.
Right. Or you're always looking around every corner. You know, this whole section is based on this premise of default to truth, and how most individuals, they have a default to trusting people. They have a default to trusting one another, to trusting what people are telling them. And you're exactly right, Sierra, because it goes back to where you go, the examples that he sets up in many ways make you go, well, I shouldn't trust anybody. I should suspect everyone all the time and start with, you have to prove your truth to me in order for me to trust you. But to your exact point, and what he says is that if you do that, any type of relationship that exists anywhere will completely erode. You cannot build any type of collaboration in your life, in society, without starting with a little bit of trust. You have to trust in them. So I thought that was fascinating. So to answer your question, what am I? We talked about this last night, actually. And I said, I think I'm both. And it depends on the situation. I think I am the holy fool when it comes to individuals. So I do tend to start not with a level of suspicion, but with a certain degree of uncertainty about individual people. And it's through those ongoing interactions with those individuals that trust is built. But when it comes to groups, I'm definitely much more of a default to truth, because I recognize that deception and deceit is not a collective matter. It's an individual matter. You know, an entire team is not full of liars. There's someone who's trying to deceive. It's usually one individual. And over time, as you interact with that group, you'll start to suss out who is and who is not telling the truth. So I always start with a level of trust with a group of people, whether it's in a training that I'm giving or, in a presentation or a conversation. When it's a group, there's trust. Individuals, not so much.
Which is great since you are a teamwork expert here on Painted Porch Strategies. It's good to trust the team.
Yeah.
I'm the opposite,
Yeah.
though. I trust individuals partly because I know that they can't really hurt me because I don't really have a lot of power over me, especially because I have been exercising my dichotomy of control. I cannot control what people say. I cannot control what people do. So if I say something and they react, whatever, off kilter, I'm like, okay, that doesn't harm me. But I have a very distrust of power. And a lot of the examples he uses in here, like Bernie Madoff, for example, who was a swindler, who took people's money, took money in, gave it out, pretending he was this big investment guru. Well, he wasn't. And the belief system around that was so fascinating that Gladwell describes, because there's so many people that want it to be true. So they refuse to accept, wow, this doesn't look right. How come this is
He's beating all
he's
the odds.
beating everyone on Wall Street?
Amazing.
Because we all want to believe that we put our money in with the genius, right?
Yeah.
Oh, this guy is a genius. He's the market whisperer. Turns out, well, that's not true. So because I've worked and studied United States government and politics for 20 plus years of my life, I have become very distrusting the holy fool when it comes to power. Because I think groups in a position of power that has power over me, whether it's taxes, whether or not you can be censored, I have that natural distrust because it has been abused so often that I'm like, But the three of us hanging out, all good in the hood. So I am a holy fool.
So I think for the both of us, it's a good balance. He doesn't trust the group. I don't necessarily start with trust. I don't default to truth with individuals, and then it's the opposite. So I think we help keep each other in check. So how about you, Sierra?
There's a certain beauty to the holy fool because they even mention like this is usually the person in the village who's a little weird. So like in a lot of circles that I run in, I'm the kind of a little weird one, right? So it's kind of fun to be the little weird one because sometimes if you say something that doesn't quite land, they'll be like, well, that's just Sierra,
But also having that outcast or that one that's a little off, they're often the ones that can bring a completely different perspective to a situation that otherwise what sometimes can happen, that group think, that that default to truth in some ways too.
Right.
They're not questioning it, which is perfect with the Bernie Madoff situation. There were so many people that were like, yeah, it looked suspicious, but there's no way. I mean, all these people are investing with him. All of these people are very smart individuals. They even talk about the one investment from Renaissance. It was founded by like mathematicians. They know the math. They do the formulas. They create the algorithms. And yet at the same time, they're like, yeah, this seems weird, but it just doesn't feel plausible that it can be this. Right. He could be swindling this many people over, this amount of money.
But does it create a balance in the system? I know that if you were a Bernie Madoff victim, you lost a lot, maybe everything you had. But doesn't that keep us more honest overall? Because I take a story like that and I'm like, okay, does it happen every day? No, but it does happen every day. We're just not really aware of it. You just don't have that big of a story. Because the other part in here is how we establish doubts. And if we default to truth, as Gladwell writes, we tend to explain away our doubts. And that's a human brain trick, right? So the other example he brings up is the Jerry Sandusky case, which he was charged with child molestation and rape as a coach at Penn State. And this is a big football program, huge football program. So it was incredibly scandalous. But as you go through the case, the way Gladwell describes it, there's a lot of nuance. It is not as cut and dry as the Larry Nassar case, who was the USA gymnastics coach, that was going on for years, right in front of parents in the room. Nassar's doing his thing. So that part is incredibly interesting too, because ultimately when I look at this book so far, as we are now about halfway through it, is the importance of the dichotomy of control, the importance of our stoic training that we preach here on Painted Porch Strategies, because if you're right in your mind, you can analyze things. And if you are aware that you default to truth and explain away your doubts, maybe in a case like, oh, okay, this Sandusky story, maybe he actually didn't do it. In the Nasser case, maybe you're like, well, okay, I have these doubts, but I know I'm explaining them away. So let me do a little bit more investigating instead of just putting it out of my mind.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, question myself, question my own assumptions, my own ideas and judgments. Because yeah, it's so interesting. And I love the way he's laying this out, because he takes these things that you think are very black and white, like, oh, Jerry Sandusky, total scumbag, right? And then you start reading and you're like, life is lived in the gray, as we always talk about. And so it's a really interesting way to just challenge yourself. And I love when he talks about the idea of beliefs, and he says a belief is not the absence of doubt. A belief, you have natural doubts. It's just there's not enough to create that trigger point, that trigger that makes you really start to inspect and question, and then flip it around.
Yeah.
Because, when they talk about the Bernie Madoff case, I don't remember the gentleman's name, but the investigator who knew like 10 years
that
before.
Greek name, Mark Harus.
Yeah, the 10 years before, he knew this was a scam, but it was because he did not default to truth. In fact, he was a holy fool in that sense, where he had a natural distrust of everyone and everything. But that can make you so much more paranoid. Like, if you're looking for monsters around every corner, you're definitely going to find them.
Yeah. Well, the thing I kept thinking about as I was reading, especially this week, was I was thinking about how in the US, in our court of law, it is you are innocent until proven guilty. Notice it's not the other way around. It's not guilty until proven innocent. You are not trying to, in an official way, you're not trying to prove that you are innocent. They're assuming you're innocent. They have to prove that you are guilty of what you are being charged against. So this just kept coming up in my head. And, it brings him right back to, in the first section, he was talking about parole judges and how parole judges were trying to make an educated guess on if they thought this person was really going to improve, was really going to grow out of this past experience. And it's really hard. I mean, it's really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the power of conversation comes in. So here at Painted Porch Strategies, I'm the MC, the master of communication, because that's what I've done my entire life. I've talked with all kinds of different people. If you have a doubt, explore it. Have a conversation. So I think what happened in all these stories, Madoff, Sandusky, Nasser, nobody pressed them because nobody wanted to. Because the Sandusky and Nasser cases are incredibly difficult to talk about because it involves child molestation and worse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to think that that is happening to their kid. But the examples of several kids going to their parents and said, yeah, he did something inappropriate and made me feel really weird. And the parents explained it away. Well, this is the gymnastics doctor. This is the way that we make it. This is the way that we heal your back so that you can maybe be on the Olympic team. So those are the explanations, right? That you have to say, okay, why am I explaining this way to myself? Should I explore it a little more? Should I confront Nasser? Maybe not in a, hey, you, but in a, hey, and ask him some questions. So one of the principles that they used at the company Toyota is 5 whys. So they figured that 5 whys can get you to the root cause of the problem. So the example that I read about was they were having some issues. So they were like, okay, what's the cause of the issue? And they said, okay, we're not producing enough fast enough. They said, okay, why is that? Are the employees poorly trained? Oh, yes. So they dug in and through their 5 whys figured out that they as a company needed to do a better job.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we shy away from is sometimes wanting to know the truth, because sometimes the truth is so damning that it can damage you.
Yeah. Well, it also, damage you in many ways, but it's starting with, I think, a bit of a default to trust, but then also just being very aware, not just brushing aside, to your point, and recognizing what is the consequence of this not being true, or this person not telling me the truth. Because the first example that they talk about is the Queen of Cuba, which that one was fantastic. Oh, I love all these stories that he gives, because in that case, it wasn't, they knew Anna Montez. So in that case, it wasn't the CIA, it was the DIA.
DI.
Yeah. So they, it was an intelligence, an arm of the I think Homeland Security, and she was in the Cuba division, and she was very well respected. Everybody knew Anna, but at the same time, so they weren't willing to truly accept or recognize that Anna might not be who she says she is, but because of that, it also can impact your reputation. How will that make me look if I'm wrong, if I've been wrong about this?
Yeah.
Very fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think that's the point. He brings up these examples, right, of all these things that there were clear signs that something was wrong. Like there were clear signs that Anna was not what she seemed, but it's hard to arrive unless you explore. And I really think that what he's getting at is ultimately how the brain works, which is something Sierra really touches on in Radical Mindfulness, her course, because your brain, and I do it in mine, works against you. Your mind plays tricks on you all the time. It's having that awareness to say, okay, this is just a thought. Okay, this is just a doubt. What am I now going to do with that doubt? Because know that you're going to rationalize away, because the human brain can rationalize anything. I mean, you look at all the people who have had weird beliefs. You want to add like a David Koresh. I don't know if anybody remembers David Koresh, but he was a cult leader who fancied himself as Jesus. And he probably believed that, because it is possible for your brain to say, yeah, I'm the new Jesus. And your brain will find evidence to say, yes, I am the new Jesus. I mean, look at me. I can't quite walk on water, but I'm pretty amazing. So you can work through anything in your brain. And I think that's what Gladwell is getting at in this book and Talking to Strangers is, here's a guide on how your brain might play tricks on you. It'll impact your communication. It will allow you to have doubts, but explain those away. Because he says it, so I have to pull up the exact quote, because he breaks the argument down in 3 different parts. It's brilliantly researched, brilliantly written to be able to pull these out. That, yep, your natural doubts, you need tons of evidence to actually believe those doubts, because it's so much easier to just, I mean, yeah, he's the doctor at the USA Gymnastics. I mean, he's got to be doing this for a reason. There's no way that he would do this, including there was one mother who said she saw him get aroused and explain that away. Like, oh no, he's this guy. I mean, he's world renowned.
Actually, she even used the term that she feels sorry for him.
Mm-hmm.
She comments that she feels bad for him. Not that there's, it's like she noticed it enough to remember, but there's not this like, oh shit, something's wrong with this. It's, oh, I feel bad for him, right? It's
the poor guy. Yeah.
It's surprising to me. Some of these things, it's like, wow, I didn't know. This is bringing to light a lot of things.
And if you're far away from it, it's easy for us to be able to say, what a disgusting human being. I hope he rots in jail. But if you're closer to it and you're closer to him, it's sometimes harder to see the forest through the trees. And that's your brain saying, oh, no. Because there is a natural tendency towards comfort, as in, I'm going along on my boat. It's not rocky. There's no rapids. I'm just chilling. But if something like that pops up, ooh, you can stay on the path and pretend everything's calm, or you can say, uh-oh, we got to learn how to boat through the rapids.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, if there was a turn in the road where, okay, I have some doubts. If I go down that path, it's going to get rocky. It's going to get bumpy. I'm going to get uncomfortable. Our brain is literally designed to keep us comfortable. So it's literally pulling us towards the calmer waters while ignoring what might be over here.
Mm-hmm.
But doubts trigger disbelief only when you can't explain them away. So natural tendency, and this is what he wants you to be aware of when you're talking to strangers is, oh, that person's this. Yeah, but that just must mean this.
Right.
So instead, investigate a little bit further.
Yeah, be willing to take the time. And it was interesting because I think about this from a Stoic perspective as well, because one of the big things that the Stoics talk about, and specifically Marcus Aurelius, is that people are naturally well-intended, right? Most people are naturally well-intended. They just don't know what's good and what's bad, or what's right and what's wrong. They've had different experiences than I have. They've had different upbringing, whatever it might be. Everyone is naturally good. And so this kind of challenged it. It kind of bumped up against that, because you're like, yeah, but not these guys. And so it's trying to find that balance as well. And you can say, you know what? Yes, still, as Gladwell says, yes, default to truth, but at the same time, default to truth and assume that you are going to bump into people who are unjust, who are despicable, who are thieves, and, everything that Marcus says. But recognize that there are some of those people that are the exception to the well-intended rule. Be aware of it. Be willing to question those doubts, but not to a point where you're questioning everything so that you trust nothing.
Well, you don't have the time
no one
to question everything either,
because
right?
then you're just
You wouldn't, if you literally questioned everything, you would have no friends, you would not be married, you would, lock your door at night to keep everybody out. I mean, it would literally drive you insane.
Yeah, you would be like that guy, the investigator who's sitting in his house at the end of this Madoff thing, gas mask, guns, waiting for someone to kick the door in and get
right.
him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, then you really wonder, like, is that any way to live? I mean, it's a choice, right? It's a choice of what things do you pay attention to when you get that little, like, something feels weird. If you truly have that feeling of something feels weird, then you should pay attention to it. But if you feel like something feels a little weird, not actually really, it was just my misunderstanding of it, a wrong interpretation. But I think asking questions. And I do love, he kind of leaves us hanging at the end of this section, because he says this is something to keep in mind. What we think we want, what we actually need. He kind of starts to, like, go there, and he says, but we are getting ahead of ourselves.
And that's why I want to commend him as a guy that's done a lot of research like this in my life. This is top of the line. This is excellent work. And what I love about this from a personal standpoint, if you read this book, the work that he put into this is very apparent. And he didn't just stop to be mediocre. He kept going. He interviewed a lot of these people on his own, because that's what Gladwell ultimately is, a journalist, a storyteller. And that, I think there's a takeaway in that too. But I want to bring it back to the Nasser thing, because another thing that stuck out to me is that the parents trusted Nasser, some of them, instead of their own kids. So that is another interesting part about this and how trust works. So instead of exploring it perhaps further with their own children, they said, no. So they defaulted to truth over their own kids. That is the power of your brain right there. Mm-hmm. And I think really one of the keys to life is mastering your own mind, right? So it's saying, okay, I know that some of the things that my brain says to me are not real. They're just things. So I need to accept that, okay, I had a thought. It's just a thought. What do I want to do with that thought? So like you said, Sierra, if you have that tinge of intuition that says, ooh, something's a little funky with this, follow that. Because I really do believe that everyone's intuition has a genius in it, because your intuition, I think, this is where I'm going to get existential for a second, it ties back to the first life form, because essentially we all evolved from that. So we're talking millions of years of intelligence on this planet in this form that our survival skill, our intuition is embedded, ingrained in us. And I think that, because society is what it is and it's amazing, we live in the best time ever to be a human, we sometimes can ignore that, not to say that our intuition's 100% right all the time, but you have it for a reason. And I think what happened here is no. Can't be true. Can't be true. This is so bad. It can't be happening to my kid. And it's easy to talk about. Much more difficult to be in that situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like Kenny Rogers says, you got to know when to hold them and know when to fold them. Know when to walk away and know when to stay. When it comes to exploring those triggers, those gut feelings, to your exact point, Sierra, listen to it, but then know how far you want to or need to take it until you find reconciliation around it. Because if not, you're going to be peeping around every corner.
Yep.
Because your mind's playing tricks on you.
Look at you quoting
Look at that.
the Ghetto Boys. Mm-hmm.
Right.
I made her listen to a lot of rap music in her life, so she's got some lyrics down. But I think that this could be a blueprint to be a better human, because we do have to trust each other, because ultimately human beings are best when we collaborate, when there is trust, which is what Amy does here at Painted Porch Strategies. Is if you have a team, you're going to do better if you trust each other. And you're going to do that when you're honest, when you're open, when you accept other people's ideas, when you're not judgmental, or even if you are judgmental, you keep them to yourself and you work on those.
Yeah.
Or you work through those judgments together.
You're able to recognize
Yes,
it.
exactly.
Yeah.
So we're a team. The three of us are a team. Sierra has her family team as well, which includes a little person, a growing little person.
Yeah.
So, you have all these dynamics, but in order to truly function, you have to be honest.
I think this chapter was a great lesson in recognizing where your beliefs lie, recognizing that
And how powerful they
can be, but being in tune to when that intuition, when there's something there that maybe requires a little bit more exploration. But if you default to distrust and you are the holy fool in all aspects of your life, tuck in, because it's going to be a bumpy ride with pretty much every relationship that you may have, or any decision that you make is going to be fraught with frustration. It's kind of like, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? Right? It's that comparison. And you don't have to pick always one or the other, but finding that balance between the two, because things aren't always as black and white as they seem.
And let's say you get something wrong, be easy on yourself, because you're naturally guided towards being wrong a lot because of the way that your brain works.
That default to truth.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what he's getting at here. It's very easy to get caught up in something and not wanting to believe it's as bad as it actually is.
Well, and I loved one of the other things that is a good thing to ponder too, building on give yourself a little grace when you maybe are deceived, because it is going to happen. These are examples of when that did happen, when maybe your intuition, you weren't cueing into those triggers, or there weren't enough of them to signal a shift. But also recognizing that so many people they can also be fooled. They can be deceived. And one of the things I thought was interesting at the end was, do you hold those people accountable for it, knowing that it can happen often? We think about with the Nassar thing, or not the Nassar thing, with the Sandusky piece, other people beyond Jerry Sandusky have been held accountable for it. Do you hold them accountable for being fooled?
Right.
Yeah, even though that maybe the story's not as true as you thought. Like, if you read this book, you're definitely going to have doubts about the veracity of the Sandusky story, at least to the full extent, if you know anything about the story, of how far it went. Right. The main witness didn't see anything, heard something, interpreted a certain way, and then midway through pursuing that, changed his mind and said he was a victim. So it's very intriguing and perhaps duplicitous on the main witness's, last name McCreary's, part. But at least, I now have doubts about that case, and I followed it relatively closely because I work in the news business, and I didn't know all of these details, and it's fascinating to peel the layers back.
Yeah. Really, It brings up a point that I think, are aware of when we're talking with strangers is there's always details you don't know. There are always things you don't know about a person. You're going off of, as Chris, my husband, would say, a snapshot, right? You're going off of a snapshot, maybe a feeling. And in this day and age where you don't even necessarily meet someone in person, you might meet them on a screen. I know for someone, I personally often go off of a lot of intuition or a feeling. It's harder for me to get that sort of a read when I'm on a screen and not in the same room. There is a subtlety there. Some people would even argue like a smell, like a pheromonal smell that you might be somehow in tune with, or an aura that's harder to read through technology. Whatever it is, you're basing this on whatever information you have and however you're perceiving it through your lens at the time. There's all these different ways that all of this information can be seen. So it's anybody's guess. I'm curious to see where Malcolm Gladwell takes us in the next chapter, because he's definitely taking us through some stuff. And I think there's a very calculated order to this. I feel like we haven't quite, I think the pieces are going to start to fall together. I'm really curious to see how they go.
Part 3, we'll discuss next week. It's called transparency.
Oh.
So again, how much truth does it? Because I'm a big believer in transparency. And one of the reasons why I don't trust a lot of powerful institutions is because they hide things or they cover up things when things go wrong. Instead of just saying, hey, we messed up. Here's what we learned. Here's how we're going to do better. And you go, oh, okay. Now I trust you because you told me when you messed up. Just like you do in a marriage or a relationship. You say, hey, you know what? I messed up. I'm sorry. Here's what I learned.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So final thoughts on part 2, talking to strangers.
There.
Wow. I think that what I'm learning is there's a lot that I don't know.
I would agree. And things aren't as black and white as you seem. And when it comes to how we judge others and maybe the mistakes that they've made or the instances where they have been fooled, remember that.
I think that is one of my takeaways. Things come into your life at the perfect time. So this book coming into my life after now years of personal development, years of understanding how the brain works, years of looking at stoicism, all of those things apply to real life in these real life examples. So the more we dig into our stoicism, the more we learn about our brains, the better equipped we are to live life with the ability to both distrust and trust and do it in the right way. And a big part of acceptance is accept what you can control. Back to the Stoics' dichotomy of control.
Well said.
On that note, we'll check in with you next week. Thank you for being here with us. If you have comments, please share them with us. We want to know your takeaways on part 2 of this book because it really is fascinating. Do you agree with us? Do you disagree with us? Are you a holy fool? Are you a defaulter to the truth? Who do you trust? Let us know. For Sierra, for Amy, I'm Rob. Cheers, everybody.